Adam, the Tar Heels and Seminoles have already played, of course, this year. That was on December 2nd in Chapel Hill. The Tar Heels won that game 78-70. The Tar Heels also trailed that game by 14 in the second half. Then, remember, went on what ended up being a 39-11 stretch over 13 minutes or so that flipped it from down 14 to up 14. That included a 22-0 run in the midst of that 39-11 stretch. I think both of those facts are relevant because Florida State was still up by 14 points, and they have two players in Cam Corrin and Primo Spears. Corrin was injured, I believe, and Spears was not eligible at the time. That was back in the crazy times when you couldn't just transfer as much as you wanted. And so the NCAA was still holding on to its couple of month stand of not letting people transfer multiple times, which we could look, we've all spoken, thanks to the Tez Walker situation, at length about all of that. But anyway, now Spears and Corrin are playing, and they're both good players, and Florida State has played well. They're winners of 6 of their last 7. They are coming off a win at Syracuse by 16 points in the middle of the week. And Tallahassee's a hard place to play. FSU's won 3 of the last 4 there against Carolina, although the Tar Heels did win there last season. So some things that you saw in that game, Carolina's pressure obviously was one of the biggest storylines. The Tar Heel press really got the Heels back in it. It would be hard to believe that you could do that again with that level of success because I'm going to guess Leonard Hamilton and his staff were aware of that too and will have their team prepared. Florida State hit more threes in that game. I think at least up until that point, it was the most threes they had made in the season. I'm not sure if they've had more in a game since then, but they hit 12. It was the worst three-point shooting game of the season still for Carolina percentage-wise. Carolina was 5 of 22 from three-point range in that game. And the fact remains, Florida State is still super lengthy and super athletic, and I think those are the teams that's given Carolina the most trouble this year. Outside of UConn, who's just really good and played really well that day, you think about Kentucky, you think about Florida State, even Louisville to a degree. Some of these teams that are the really long athletic teams have bothered the Tar Heels at times, and the Tar Heels are not alone in that. So to me, Adam, this is a really difficult game. I don't think it's the most difficult game left on the schedule because Carolina still has to go to Duke and go to Miami and go to Virginia, which are hard places to win. But I do think this is one of the harder games that Carolina has remaining this year, and it will take a very good effort to win it.
I think this is the most difficult ACC game Carolina has played to this point. First meeting notwithstanding, largely because of what you said about the 2 extra players, and Spears addresses the major deficiency that Florida State had in that first meeting. He would have been very helpful to bring the ball up against that pressure. The fact that I think this is the most difficult ACC game the Tar Heels have played so far really points out how dumb the net is, because this is not a quad 1 game for Carolina at the moment. So if you win this game, you've won a great game, but you probably drop them even further in the net, and then it'll never be a quad 1 game. If you lose, maybe they move up, and then it becomes a quad 1 game, and then you have a quad 1 loss. So either they're good or they're not. I think they are good, which just shows you how silly the net is. They do foul a ton. Carolina's got to get to the free throw line and convert those opportunities.
And that was a big part of the first game. I mean, Carolina was 25 of 31 at the free throw line. Florida State was 4 of 8. So plus 21 at the free throw line, obviously a big deal. Now, are the whistles the exact same when you're the road team as when you're the home team? Don't know. But that was a significant factor in the first game. R.J. Davis had a terrific game. He had 27 points. Baycott had a double-double, 13 and 13. Ingram had 11, but then after that, Seth Trimble had 9. Cormac Ryan had 8. Just looking through the first matchup, Cadeau was important it felt like, if I remember correctly, in that run for Carolina. He ended up with 7 points and 3 assists. For FSU, Jameer Watkins had 17. 3 different guys had 12 points. And again, Florida State, don't forget, and this is not any different than normal, I mean, they rotate guys in almost every dead ball. I mean, they're making subs. So they're going to play a lot of guys. You can expect to see 10, 11 guys out there for Florida State. And Carolina traditionally plays at least 9. So there should be a lot of guys in the mix. And this is an important game. You look at the standings, win here, Adam, if you're Carolina, then all of a sudden, no matter what happens in other games, at that point, Duke would have 2 losses. And if you give Florida State another loss, then everybody else would have at least 3. And then you're really starting to find some separation. And at minimum, you're starting to find, I think, a very comfortable feeling of making the top 4 and getting that double bye in the ACC tournament. Because if you look at the standings right now, this is before any games this weekend. Carolina's sitting at 8-0. Florida State's 6-2. Duke's 5-2. Then Virginia, State, Wake, all 5-3. Miami, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, 4-4. Clemson, 3-4. And then you start getting to teams that have 5, 6, 7 losses in conference play already. So you have an opportunity, if you're Carolina, to really strike a pretty significant blow to a team that is one of the teams challenging you at the top of the standings, not to mention the fact that you would have won both games against that team, which would really put them in a bind.
Yeah, I mean, and we're almost halfway through the ACC schedule, so it's time to start seeing some of these tiers develop. And I do think Carolina's in that top tier, but you got to go on the road and you've got to win games like this. I mean, this is the difference between being a pretty good team and you could potentially start saying you got a chance to be a great team if you're able to go on the road and beat Florida State. They looked incredible in the last few minutes against Syracuse this week. They looked pretty good up until then, and then it was like they decided to play, and they were hard to beat just because of that length you're talking about in all kinds of passing lanes. That's why I think this is a more confident version of Elliot Cadeau than what Florida State saw in the first meeting. He's going to be important because when he gets in the lane, there's going to be bigger bodies there than what he's seen the last month or so, and he's got to continue to attack and be just as aggressive. And he can get Carolina to the free throw line because the one place the length doesn't bother you is when you're unguarded at the line.
Adam, just real quickly, as we are talking about Carolina, Florida State, and then the ACC, if you look at any of the NCAA tournament projections at the moment, which, say what you will about those things, they at least are generally accurate. You're not going to have somebody who's wildly off. Most of these only have 3 ACC teams in the tournament right now: Carolina, Duke, and Clemson. And, I mean, even just, it seems like every week, it's just like the league is kind of cannibalizing itself. Like, for example, State beats Virginia in Raleigh a couple weeks ago, and then Virginia beats State in Charlottesville in a real ugly game on Wednesday. Miami can't seem to get out of its own way half the time, and it did win at Notre Dame earlier in the week. Wake Forest, of course, lost to Carolina. They'll have some more chances coming up. They play Duke twice and a bunch of other games. Virginia Tech had a bad start to the year, is playing better now. Virginia's been pretty average and not as good as it has been in recent years, certainly. I don't know, Adam. It's like I do think Carolina is good and having a good year. I think Duke is good and has had some inconsistent moments, but very good. Clemson had a really good non-conference, has been okay in conference play, but the computers love them for some of the wins they had in non-conference. And then, like that group of Miami, Virginia, State, maybe Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. Like, somebody's got to do something in that group for them to be able to get some league representation in the postseason.
And I think that's why it's so difficult to beat Carolina in this scenario, because almost every team you play really needs that win in order to boost their credentials, which, of course, is the scenario Carolina found itself in last year on the other side. So a team like Florida State really, really needs this win because they need a win to point to and say, look, there. That's the real Seminoles. So I think that's a challenge. I think from the Carolina perspective, as far as NCAA tournament goes, if they announce the field today, which I think they should.
Yeah, go ahead.
Carolina would be going to Charlotte, which is huge. Because right now I think the Tar Heels are the clear front runner to play there, which is very important.
Yeah, I mean, just on the national landscape, Duke is going to be, in consideration for that. Tennessee likely would be in consideration for that as well.
Kentucky,
I assume. So, although Pittsburgh, I think Pittsburgh, the city, is also hosting a regional, which might be actually closer for Kentucky. But yeah, that would be a big plus, certainly. I think the Tar Heels, if it was today, at worst, would be a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament and probably would be a 1. So, yeah, not quite time to start thinking about it, but I think it's getting close to that time of year. We're almost in February. And so you do have to start at least thinking about those type of things. And again, I guess maybe we could throw Syracuse in that conversation, maybe, in that group of teams. Somebody's got to do something. Because it just seems like in that group, one of them will get a win or 2 in a row, and then they'll lose 2 in a row. And it just feels like nobody can really get any momentum. Now, from the Carolina perspective, when the Heels play them, yes, keep whatever. They lose every time. We'd like that. But 3 teams is not good.
Well, we've talked about this before. We've definitely reached the point in the season where when Central Florida beats Kansas,
right,
it's because the Big 12 is incredible and the depth is just phenomenal. But when something similar happens in the ACC, it's because the ACC is bad. I don't know how to break that cycle. Like, why don't people believe Florida State is just as good as Central Florida?
Right. I think part of the problem is, and you look through this, it does to me come back down to the Florida State lost to Lipscomb. It's like you can't lose to Lipscomb.
You really can't schedule them at all. And if you do schedule them, you can't lose.
Right. And so, because I think Florida State's good. Florida State to me is good enough to be an NCAA tournament team.
Yes.
But right now, they're sitting here at 12-7 and 6-2 in the league. And the 6-2 record is good, but people, to your point, are going to go, well, whatever. It's the ACC. Anybody could go 6-2 in that league. And so I think it just hurt them what they did before they got into conference play. So, I don't know. From the Tar Heel perspective, just keep winning, of course. But from the league-wide perspective, if you only get Carolina, Duke, and Clemson in, and Clemson is down, in those projections, they're starting to be in like the 7, 8, 9 area, which means you're starting to get in the danger zone, then, could you imagine if it was just Carolina and Duke in the NCAA tournament from the league? That would be bad.
And adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU
don't worry, that'll fix it.
Is not going to help. It's going to have the opposite effect.
So we'll see what happens over the next 6 weeks or so of the regular season for the Tar Heels. They're in a sneakily difficult stretch. They got back-to-back road games, then Duke and Clemson at home. Then they go to Miami, I think. They got to go on the road somewhere else after that. So
Syracuse.
So tough stretch coming up for the Tar Heels.
Just side note, there's also financial implications to not getting teams in.
Yes.
Which the ACC isn't really in position to just give away financial bonuses.
Yeah, look, we need the units.
Yeah.